Hello, everyone, and welcome back. This is the Parent Solution, and this is our second episode, I believe, but our first actual episode in which we are talking about actual solutions to parents' problems that they deal with on a regular basis, particularly when it comes to children. Talking about some practical ways that we can solve problems for the parents and for the educators out there. So today's topic, we're talking about teaching modalities and specifically types of learning. And those of you who know the different types of learners will understand that there are very different ways of approaching children and their learning styles. For those of you who don't know, there's three main types of learners that we categorize children into. That is visual, kinesthetic, and auditory. So visual, that's pretty self-explanatory. That means children who learn best by what they see or learn best by watching someone do something and then being able to understand it best that way. Kinesthetic learners are more hands-on learners. They need to do something to understand it, and that does not necessarily mean problems on a piece of paper, but actual practical modeled solutions with hands-on materials. Auditory learners are people who learn through an auditory manner. So people who learn, and children who learn through hearing things and being able to hear what is going on in order for them to understand what they need to do or what it is that's expected of them. So today, in this framework of talking about the three different kinds of learners, Jamie and I here wanted to talk about public school and kind of the one-size-fits-all approach that public schools have. And why exactly it doesn't work. Now, before I kind of give my opinion on why it doesn't work in schools, Jamie, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah. Hi, everybody, and welcome back. It's interesting, for the time that I had spent the last 16 years of my career in the school board. It's interesting to see as the years went on how much more recognizable that this problem is in our public school system, and how you can differentiate so much more clearly of the auditory, kinesthetic, and auditory and visual learners, and how much they're struggling in the school system. And it's not the one size fits all anymore. And I don't think it ever has been. But as the years gone on, I can see it more and more of an issue moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've had experience myself as a teacher within a school setting, but you've definitely had more experience within that setting than I have. So it's reassuring to hear that the things that I saw in my shorter time as a public school teacher are also kind of repeated by someone who's been in there for much longer, for much longer than I was. So that's reassuring to me to hear that I assessed it correctly, but it's also disappointing because it is a problem and it's been an ongoing problem, as you said, throughout the years and throughout as your time has gone on there. And I think that it really is ultimately harming kids. This kind of one size fits all approach that we're just going to throw everything to the wall and see what sticks. And if a child doesn't understand something, well, then you just send them to the resources room or you send them to the spec ed room. And ultimately that I think that harms kids because it's this sort of figure it out yourself mentality. And while that is admirable in some cases, when you have children who are trying to learn and you have kids who are in a very vulnerable situation trying to expand their brains, so to speak, if they're not guided the correct way, then you can end up with a child who just doesn't know what they're doing. And that's just talking about the academics, let alone the life skills that are missing from school. That's a whole other podcast episode. I really think too that class size has something to do with it as well. And I know a lot of people have been pushing for smaller class sizes over the years. And the reason for that, I would say that the reason for smaller class sizes is simply that when you have smaller class sizes, you get a more integrated approach, and the teacher themselves is able to easily adapt to different learners because instead of 20 kids, they might have 12 or 13 or 14. And I know with private schools, that's the case. Is often it's smaller class sizes, but it's known as a better quality of education because there are less children for the teacher to have to divide their attention between, and the children get better instruction, they get more focused instruction, they can learn the way that they need to learn because the teacher has the time to be able to take with each student because there's less of them.
Yeah, absolutely, Kimberly. And I think that is one incredible solution. But if we can just back up for a second, when you had mentioned, um, the one size it doesn't fit all, and kind of they have to figure it out on themselves. There, to your point, there's definitely pros and cons to that in a sense, but I also think it's not only harming them academically, but it's harming them socially and developmentally, and with their self-esteem and confidence, because if they are lacking in the academic piece, and as you mentioned, you go to the resource room or you go to get help from a spec ed teacher, that's, for those of you who don't know, it's special education. um some kids don't want to do that. Some kids don't believe that they should do that. They don't want to ostracize themselves from their classroom. They have to go to another room for help, right? And why can't I get it just like all my other friends in my class? Why do I have to leave, right? And if it's only because of the way that the lesson or material is being presented to them is causing that issue, then we got a real problem moving forward.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that really, yeah, it ultimately, just because they can fit themselves into that box, right? You speak of them, wanting to stay with their friends, and I think that has a lot to do with yeah, the social aspect of it. They want to be with their friends. They want to be included, right? They don't want to feel like they're ostracized. You would have much more experience in that area. Than I would, especially on a group level in a more academic setting and being in a public school, being part of the board, and in that kind of official educational environment. I think that yeah, it has a lot to do with that. And so children, from my experience as a private educator, they will try so hard to fit themselves into that box, even if they're not a visual learner, even if they're not a kinesthetic learner. They will try their best, or an auditory learner. They will try their best to conform themselves to what the rest of the classroom is dealing with because they want to be included at all costs, right? And especially when you're talking about children, particularly teenagers, that desire to be involved and to conform and to be a part of the group is huge. It's huge. Like, forget about peer pressure and all the other things. Like, even just being a teenager in regular school is hard because they just want to be part of a group. Um, and that's dangerous when you're talking about a lot of things, but particularly in this context for this podcast episode, we're talking about the academic repercussions of that. Just because they can fit themselves into a box academically doesn't mean that they should have to.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And to go back, you did mention to make smaller class sizes and to tailor to the education to the group of learners. And that's the responsibility of the Ministry of Education and public education. But we all know that systematic change takes very long with lots and lots of obstacles. Um, and you know, absolutely, this would be a great thing to see in the future, 100%. And as parents, as educators, we can definitely keep fighting for that because I know that they are. But what are things, considering that this is the parent solution, and we, mentioned in our first podcast that we are all about bringing practical solutions and strategies for the parents and educators. What do you think are some of the things that we can kind of start now at home as parents to navigate and to help our children in the different learning styles of the one size fits all approach that we're in right now?
That's a good question, and it's definitely something that varies from family to family. But on a general basis, I would say a very good solution for most parents is to do nothing more than to just be involved as much as possible. And depending on what age of child you have, that might be a little more difficult than others. Like I said, teenagers in high school or in grade 7 and 8 have a much less, they're much less willing for their parents to talk to their teachers and things like that, right? But if your child is struggling academically and that's of concern to you, then you need to get involved. You have to be vocal about your child's needs. In my personal and professional opinion, we need to push for smaller class sizes. Everyone across the world needs to push, or I'd say across, the Western Hemisphere, in Western society needs to push for smaller class sizes. There's power in numbers. If everybody pushed for smaller class sizes, it would happen a lot faster than if only a few people were pushing for it, right? So there's power in numbers. Push for smaller class sizes. Push for like advocate, advocate, advocate. I know that you want to be as involved as possible. Most parents care deeply about their children, and that extends to their academic education. Um, you have to advocate. There's no other way past being vocal other than to just be vocal. You're not going to get anywhere if you just sit and don't say anything. And if it's not an issue for your child, then no problem. But I know many parents, many parents from my experience, are having huge issues with public education, particularly right now. One way to solve the learning challenges is to make smaller class sizes. And there's no other way to get past that other than to be vocal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can speak too from experience in the board. The parents that had, strong advocacy skills and the ones that kept calling the schools or the teacher or the emails, um, those are the ones that made the changes for for their child. And I know we all live busy lives, and I know we're running around in a million one directions. Um, but you know,
Maybe a
yeah,
million and two.
yeah, good point. um, but to figure out, what is actually going on in your child's classroom, and to figure out where your child's lagging skills are, that is a huge win that you can start incorporating at home with the resources that you've talked about. Bringing the community of network of people who are experts in their fields and are willing to help. If you know what the lagging skills are, if you know where that disconnect from the classroom and the teacher and your child is, you can be better prepared to find those resources and the support at home.
Yes, absolutely. And on that note, I know for a fact, if you are in touch with the child's teacher or you're in touch, through email or phone or whatever the contact method is, and you know what your child's weaknesses are that they need to work on, and the things in which they need to get caught up on, and the ways in which they learn, there's lots there. We have the internet. We have the internet at our disposal. Like there are so many, I will speak as a private educator, there are so many educational websites out there that you can get so many resources from. Like it is as simple as going to your computer and typing something in the Google search bar. If you want to find it badly enough, you will. That's a huge thing. Like 30 years ago, we didn't have the internet. I personally don't remember a time when there wasn't internet. I remember the old computers when they were first invented, but I don't remember a time when there wasn't internet. And that's just my generation. You just have to use the resources that you have. That's something that even if you don't have internet at home, you can take advantage of public resources like libraries and other community centers that are able to provide those resources for you.
And even reach out to friends and family as well, right? That might have maybe a little bit more
Hmm.
time, or that can, uncles and aunts, grandparents that can help you support, good friends in your community.
Yeah, absolutely, Jamie. I think that's a great idea. I think those are awesome. Awesome. That's an awesome network to have if you have friends or family who take an interest in the academic side of things and who take an interest in the educational side of things with their grandchild or their niece or their nephew or something like that. So if you have family members, absolutely, like Jamie said, building a community is really important. So these are some of the many solutions that we've chatted about today on our second podcast episode on the parent solution. These are solutions specifically geared for this podcast. We specifically talked about solutions that are for the parents who are wanting to or willing to navigate the public educational system. What we want to talk about on our next podcast episode is for those of you who do not want something that is similar to that, who are looking for something that's a little bit different, perhaps an alternative method of education.
I can't wait for next week's conversation. We're gonna shake things up a little bit. I think it's gonna be a good one.
Oh,
I
for
think
sure.
we think that just about covers everything for this podcast. Thank you again, everybody, so much for listening. We appreciate all of you. And just a reminder that new episodes will be premiering every Tuesday at 5 a.m. Eastern. So we will see you all then. And remember, this is the Parent Solution. This is your one stop shop for counseling, insight, and all things educational.